già siamo sul vivo. Buonasera a tutti. Adesso abbiamo con noi il professore dottore Stephan Kampowski. Leggerò la sua presentazione e poi dirò su che cosa parlerà. Questo è in inglese. Recuerdo a todos que esta conferencia va a ser en inglés. Voy a leer en este momento su CV resumido y después vamos a comenzar propiamente ya con su diálogo, con su exposición. Dr. Stephan Kampowski was born in Kaufbeuren, Bavaria. He grew up in the northern of Germany, Lower Saxony. In 2014, he was nominated full professor of philosophical anthropology at the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family in Rome, where he had been teaching since 2005, and where he had also defended his doctoral dissertation of Hannah Arendt's Action Theory and Moral Thought. In 2019, he was nominated full professor at the newly founded Pontifical Theological Institute John Paul II for Marriage and Family Science in Rome. He was one of the coordinators of the Master in Bioethics and Formation, organized by the John Paul II Institute and the Institute of Bioethics and Medical Humanities of the University of the Sacred Heart of Rome. Prior to his study at the John Paul II Institute, Dr. Kampowski studied at the International Theological Institute in Gaming, Austria, where he completed his licentiate degree in sacred theology. Before going to Austria, he attended the Franciscan University of Stavanger, where he obtained two Master of Arts degrees, one in philosophy and one in theology. His doctoral dissertation was published by Edelman's Grand Rapids under the title Arendt, Augustine, and the New Beginning, the Action Theory and Moral Thought of Hannah Arendt. In the spring of 2008, he spent a research semester under the guidance of Dr. Stanley Hauerbach at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, where he completed another book project which examined the contribution of Hans Jonas and Helen Habermas to the current debate on biotechnology, and which has since been published by Pickwick Publications. Biotechnology, Love, and Human Destiny. His more recent publications include La fecundità de una vita, verso un'antropologia del matrimonio e della famiglia, di Cantagalli, and Embracing Our Finitude, Exercise in a Christian Anthropology Between Dependence and Gratitude. Benissimo. La ringrazio moltissimo, professore Stephan Kampowski, di stare qui con noi e chiedo scusa di aver letto qualche cosa sbagliata perché non parlo di solito in inglese. Il suo tema per oggi è The Theology of the Body in the Light of Hermeneutics of the Gift. Quiero agradecer también ahora en español a Veritas Amoris Project por cooperar con este congreso activamente, ya que la mayoría de los profesores son justamente de Veritas Amoris Project. Tante gracias. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Guido, for the presentation of my person and for the invitation to come and to talk at this online conference. So, as you see in the title that is on the screen, my topic is the theology of the body in the light of a hermeneutics of the gift. So let me get right into it. In his Wednesday catechesis on human love in the divine plan, which is called the theology of the body, St. John Paul II proposes what he calls an adequate anthropology. Now, how is it adequate? It is adequate in as much as it seeks to take seriously human experience. He spells out more concretely what he has in mind with human experience when he discusses what he calls the original experiences of solitude, unity, and nakedness, but also those of love, shame, and guilt. The Pope warns against a naturalistic reduction of these experiences, of any experience. A naturalistic reduction, what could that mean? Well, one might think here of the temptation to interpret love or bonding simply as the effects of some hormones, like the secretion of oxytocin by the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, or to see in guilt and shame nothing more than mere social feedback mechanisms encouraging conformity. Now, that would be a reduction of human experience. Taking experience seriously means going beyond this. So instead of those naturalistic interpretations of our basic human experiences, whether in biological or in sociological terms, John Paul II proposes what he calls a hermeneutics of the gift. So here is our topic, the hermeneutics of the gift. This must be understood in the subjective sense of the genitive. That is, it is the gift that provides the interpretation. Hermeneutics, we know, is the science of interpretation. Hermeneutics of the gift in the subjective sense of the genitive means what is doing the interpretation, what is doing the science of interpretation is the gift. It's the gift, hermeneutics, of human experience. Properly interpreted, human experience will in turn provide us with the adequate anthropology of which John Paul II speaks. In other words, for an adequate anthropology, we need to turn to human experience as seen in the light of the category of the gift. In the context of the catechesis, the gift is the interpretative key to unlock the mystery of the human being. Now, let me make a case for that. Let me make a case for the claim that the gift is really the central category of John Paul II's theology of the body. An early, somewhat foundational section of his catechesis is entitled Man in the Dimension of the Gift, from Catechesis 13 to 22. Here, the Polish pontiff clearly asserts that the dimension of the gift is decisive for the essential truth and depth of the meaning of original solitude, unity, nakedness, which are the original experiences around which much of his subsequent reflections will turn. But even more so, for him, the dimension of the gift stands also at the very heart of the mystery of creation, which allows us to build the theology of the body from the beginning. Creation is seen as a gift. In its sexual difference, the body is a witness to this original gift. In its sexual difference, the body is a witness to the original gift. The body's spousal meaning speaks to the human vocation to make a free gift of ourselves. The spouses are called to give each other to one another with the freedom of the gift. So we see the gift is everywhere. In Michael Waldstein's counting, the noun gift, or in Italian dono, occurs 338 times in the catechesis, while the verb to give, donare, comes, that is to give as a gift, donare, comes to some 47 appearances. Waldstein calls the hermeneutics of the gift the theology of the body's main theological method. Now, as central as the category of the gift is in the catechesis, and as much as it helps John Paul II to provide a hermeneutics of human experience, which in turn he hopes will provide an adequate anthropology, the fact is that he did not provide a hermeneutics of the gift itself, that is, the gift in the objective sense of the genitive. That means he does not turn the category of the gift into an object of a science of interpretation. The gift as a key to the problem of the human person is not itself rendered problematic. Its meaning is by and large being taken as obvious. One can, of course, say with Ludwig Wittgenstein that the meaning of a word is its use in language. And in fact, up to a certain point, how John Paul II understands the category of the gift does become clear from the way he employs the term. Nonetheless, given our preconceptions, words like disinterested may easily lead us up the wrong path unless we turn to the category of the gift itself, turn it into an object of a separate reflection. In absence of such reflection, we may also be tempted to take certain profound assertions that John Paul II makes and take them as simple intuitions of a recognized genius without being able to give a reason for them from the logic of the gift itself. For instance, what would be the reason why in the whole of the work of creation, it is only about him, the human person, that one can say a gift has been granted? Still, more fundamentally, on what grounds will it become intelligible that there is a strong link between the mystery of creation as a gift that springs from love and that beatifying beginning of man's existence as male and female? In what follows, I want to argue that these and similar affirmations are not based on sheer intuition or direct insight, but that they stringently follow from premises provided by the internal logic of the gift, as it must have been present in Wojtyła's understanding, though he has left this understanding mostly implicit. So in what follows, I would like to make explicit what John Paul II has left implicit, proposing a hermeneutics of the gift in the objective sense of the genitive, that is, making the gift an object of the science of interpretation. To do so, I will mostly draw on the findings and suggestions of Marcel Mauss and scholars taking their bearings from him, and in particular Marcel Enough. The hope is that by clarifying the notion of the gift in Maussian terms, and by applying the results to John Paul II's hermeneutics of the gift, one will obtain excellent results for understanding the Pope's adequate anthropology. For this purpose, it is not necessary to presuppose that Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II, has actually read Marcel Mauss or has acquired familiarity with members of his school. It is enough to be able to assume that both Wojtyła, John Paul II, on the one hand, and Mauss and his students on the other, have been able to see something profoundly true about the nature of the gift, which the former has implied in his use of the term, which the latter have spelled out in greater detail. So let me turn to Marcel Mauss and his essay on the gift. Now, Marcel Mauss was a French sociologist whose main time of activity was at the beginning of the last century. He was the nephew of Emil Durkheim, who some consider the father of contemporary sociology, and Durkheim had a significant influence on Mauss. Mauss, in turn, inspired generations of subsequent scholars and researchers, such as a very famous researcher, thinker, cultural anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, but also Alain Caillé, Jacques Godbout, or Marcel Enough, who will be the main source then of my interpretation of Mauss's text. In his essay sur le don, his essay on the gift, he provides a very influential panorama of the topic of the gift. And this essay has been so influential that one will be hard-pressed to find, today at least, if we find recent publications on the gift, to find sociologists or even philosophers who do not at least mention Mauss's text. In 1981, the Mouvement anti-utilitariste dans le sens social was founded in Paris, and the acronym MAUS is not accidental, but clearly reveals the source of its inspiration. Its trimestral publication, Revue des Maus, continues to keep Marcel Mauss's memory alive. As the subtitle of Mauss's essay makes clear, his is not a philosophical discourse on the category of the gift, but rather a description of the form and the reasons for exchange in archaic societies. His main contribution lies in the alignment and systematic presentation of the material provided by other scholars and researchers. So there are essentially three very important notions in Marcel Mauss's essay, and that would be the potluck, which is a practice of ritual exchange in British Columbia at the turn of the last century, at the turn of between 1800s and 1900s, and in Melanesia and Papua New Guinea, the practice of kula, the kula ring, and finally the notion of the how that is present in the among the Maori in New Zealand. Both kula and potluck are ritualized forms of exchange between tribal groups. They are devoid of any apparent economic interest, and especially in the case of the potluck, they are highly antagonistic and competitive. The competition is about who is going to be the most generous. There are three structural elements to what Mauss calls the archaic gift: to give, to receive, and to return. All three are obligatory. I cite, "The obligation to give is the essence of the potluck. A chief must give potlucks for himself, his son-in-laws, for all the members of his tribe. Otherwise, he will lose his authority." I see citing. So the failure to give means to lose prestige. It means to lose one's soul. It means to lose one's persona. It's a horrible thing not to give, or even it's like losing in war or making a mistake in an important ritual. In the same way, there's an obligation to give. As there's an obligation to give, there's an obligation to receive. One has no right to refuse a gift, Mauss says. To refuse a gift or to refuse to attend one of these ceremonies, this potluck, is to have one's name flattened. It is to be dismayed. It means to be to lose the weight attached to one's name. And finally, there's the obligation to return. So once one has received, someone has given, one has received, one must reciprocate the gift with interest. Not to give at all, not to give enough, to give in the wrong way, or to refuse to receive, not to return. All this means losing one's faith. It may even be a declaration of war. Apart from the kula ring and the potluck, in these among these native societies, Aboriginal societies, there is also the phenomenon of the how. The how is the spirit of the thing given, as recounted by the Maori of New Zealand. These Maori describe the how as a mystical force by which the gift wants to return to the giver. To hang on to the gift, not to pass it on to another, is to bring destruction upon oneself. So what imposes obligation in the present received, in the gift received and exchanged, is the fact that according to the Maori, the thing is not inactive. In some ways, the giver has a hold over the beneficiary, just as being its owner, the thing stolen has a hold over a thief. The giver of the gift remains present in the gift. And Maus puts it this way: hence it follows that to make a gift to someone of something is to make a present of some part of oneself. So by giving a gift to someone, I am invested in it. Now that is the analysis of, say, cultural anthropology, cultural anthropologists who went out to study tribes who have been a bit isolated, a bit separated from the rest of the world, the turn of the 19th century. And Marcel Mauss describes these practices, and all these practices in some ways he summarizes, he sums up under the name of gift. Now, when the French philosopher Jacques Derrida reads Marcel Mauss, his comment is that Mauss would seem to be talking about everything except about the gift. If the exchange is compulsory, if one must give, must receive, must return, then one of the characteristics that most people acknowledge is essential to the gift would seem to be completely absent. The gift's gratuity. The gift, if it's truly to be such, would appear to be gratuitous, without any obligation to be given or received in the first place, and without imposing any duty to being repaid. For Derrida, the gift must not in any way indebt the beneficiary toward the benefactor. The fact is that for the French deconstructionist, every debt amounts to a damage. If the benefactor wants to do good to the beneficiary, he or she cannot impose a debt on the other, which would be to the other's harm rather than to his or her good. For Derrida, even the beneficiary's simple recognition of the gift as gift would mean to annul the gift. The recognition would be a sort of paying back of a debt, but both a debt and a return must be excluded. Now, let me cite from Derrida. For there to be a gift, it is necessary that the donee not give back, amortize, reimburse, acquit himself, enter into a contract. The gift mustn't even appear as a gift. Even the simple recognition suffices to annul the gift because it gives back in the place, let us say, of the thing itself, symbolic equivalent. Now, even if someone is saying, oh, thank you, that's a symbolic equivalent to paying back. So it's necessary, nothing must be expected, no one must owe. For there to be a gift, Derrida writes, there must not be any reciprocity, no return, no exchange, no countergift, no debt. If the other gives me back or owes me or has to give me back what I give him or her, there will not have been a gift. Whether this restitution is immediate or whether it is programmed by a complex calculation of long-term deferral. This is so much for Derrida. So, well, one may say, well, this is very spiritual and very pious and very, very reverent of the gift. The gift must be disinterested, and altruistic. But if we think it through to the end, then we find out, we must say with Derrida, that ultimately, as he puts it, these conditions of possibility of the gift designate simultaneously the conditions of its impossibility. So even he would speak further on, he would speak literally of the madness of the gift. There's not a logic of the gift, there's a madness of the gift. So what he does, he does propose some solution which is very based on Heidegger's philosophy, but it leaves many people unconvinced. And what needs to interest us here is that the French philosopher has simply brought to their head certain convictions about the gift that are quite widespread and commonplace. The gift has to be entirely gratuitous. It must not be the source of any indebtedness on the part of the beneficiary. It must not be the motive of any advantage on the part of the benefactor. The gift must be completely disinterested and altruistic. No repayment in any coin whatsoever must be expected. Now, and then by describing types of social exchange that involve obligatory giving, receiving, and returning, Marcel Mauss would seem to have spoken of something else, not of the gift. The gift needs to be disinterested, altruistic. That is the perspective that I want to challenge in what follows. This is the perspective that Derrida brings to its head, that goes contrary to Marcel Mauss, and I will argue it also goes contrary to Jean Paul II. And we will have difficulties understanding Jean Paul II if we understand the gift in the terms Derrida understands it. And I think we can better understand Jean Paul II if we understand the gift in terms of Marcel Mauss. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let us see how already in the tradition, in Thomas Aquinas, it is possible that there is a coexistence of gratuity and a requirement for reciprocity, and even the existence of a moral debt. So, as unfamiliar and positively strange as some of the customs described by Marcel Mauss seem to us, and even if the convictions about the gift's disinterestedness may be deeply ingrained into our culture, the fact of the matter is that we find analogous observations already in St. Thomas Aquinas and in Seneca, on whom the angelic doctor mainly bases himself in his discussion of gratitude. The gift is the source of a debt which the beneficiary is bound to return. There is indeed a parallel between practices of the indigenous populations described by Mauss and the analyses of St. Thomas. It is important, however, to emphasize that when Thomas speaks about debt, he clearly distinguishes between two forms of debt, a legal debt and a moral debt. A legal debt results from a contractual agreement and needs to be paid in justice according to these terms. A moral debt results from someone being the beneficiary of another's gift. It is a debt of love that one will not repay at once, compelled by legal terms. Rather, the grateful beneficiary will render it spontaneously, waiting for the appropriate time when repayment will be most beneficial. It is a repayment that resides to a large extent in the affection rather than in its actual effects. And here Thomas cites Seneca, who receives a favor gratefully, has already begun to pay it back. No, there are many ways of repaying those who are well off, Seneca says. Whatever we happen to owe them, even the rich people, even if we are poor, we can pay back the rich by good advice, frequent fellowship, affable, pleasant conversation, without flattery. So repayment is possible, but maybe in a different coin. There is, however, a requirement of reciprocity, according to Seneca and according to St. Thomas. As to the question of paying back favors with interest, here too there's a certain congruence between Thomas and Seneca on the one hand and Mauss on the other hand. For Thomas, gratitude regards the favor received according to the intention of the benefactor, who seems to be deserving of praise, chiefly for having conferred the favor gratis, for free. Now, unless the beneficiary repays more, he will only be seen to be paying back what he owed and not to give anything gratis. Therefore, gratitude always inclines, as far as possible, to pay back something more. Now, that seems implausible to us. But again, here it's not a question of precisely the legal terms. I pay you quid pro quo for this, for that, but a question of we will see that the gift can be or should be understood as an invitation to enter into relationship. And then if I receive something and I give back a little more, that means I want to keep the cooler ring, if you want. I want to keep the relationship going. I want to keep the gift relationship going. Now, what is particularly fascinating about this passage is the fact that Thomas does not see the least conflict between the gratuity of the gift and the moral obligation to make a return. For much of modern moral philosophy, the very idea that someone could be morally obliged to bestow something gratis would appear as a contradiction in terms. The reason for these difficulties lies in the legalistic nature of much of modern moral philosophy, which makes it hard still to perceive the difference between a legal and a moral obligation. As we are now turning to Marcel Enough's interpretation of Mauss's essay on the gift, we hold on to the thought that, at least to the mind of Thomas Aquinas, the notions of gratuity and obligation are not mutually exclusive, and that to him, the idea that one could be obliged gratuitously to repay even more than one has gratuitously received is not only not absurd, but stands to reason. As Marcel Enough sheds light on Mauss's descriptions, he may incidentally help us also to come to a better grasp of the angelic doctrine. Now, Marcel Enough grants to Jacques Derrida that there seems to be a broad consensus in contemporary society that giving a gift is to provide a good service, a good or a service in a disinterested way, that is, without any expectation or guarantee of reciprocation. On this view, a gift is not the source of any obligation whatsoever, and therefore, whatever type of social exchange Mauss might have described, he would have been wrong to call it by the name of gift. Enough responds to this challenge by pointing out that in our experience we can find at least three categories of the gift. There is indeed, for one, what Mauss named the archaic gift, and to which Enough prefers to refer to as the ceremonial gift. Second, there is what Enough calls the gracious or oblative gift, and finally, the gift in the sense of mutual aid associated with either social solidarity or philanthropy. Enough makes a generally convincing case for his distinctions. Only the ceremonial gift, which is necessarily public, carries with it a strict obligation to reciprocate. For him, ceremonial exchanges are understood as exchanges not of goods, but of symbols, and more precisely, as public procedures of reciprocal recognition among groups. The ceremonial gift serves as an invitation to form an alliance between groups. Its point is the mutual recognition of the parties involved, and therefore it requires a response. Therefore it is necessarily public and belongs to the realm of the political. What is exchanged is not anything useful, but something precious that carries a symbolic value. One may think here of works of art or historically significant objects exchanged by heads of state on the occasion of a state visit. The oblative gift may be private and is mostly unilateral. He gives the example of parents giving presents to their children, the young children, for instance, on their birthday or for Christmas. The gift of mutual aid, in turn, responds to situations of particular need, whether on the personal level or on the level of groups or nations. It is the response to specific crises like accidents, natural disasters, or war. Here, what is given is a useful gift, not a symbolic one, and certainly no immediate reciprocation is being expected. Introducing the distinction between ceremonial, oblative, and solidaric gift, enough certainly manages to shed important light on the notion of the gift. Indeed, according to him, one needs to accept that there are at least 3 paradigms of the gift rather than one. And one may readily grant his point that when speaking about the gifts exchanged by heads of state on a state visit, the gifts given by parents to their young children on their birthdays, the gifts given by individuals, groups, or nations to neighboring citizens affected by an earthquake, one is not using the word gift in a univocal way. However, so the gift means a little bit something different in each case. It's not univocal. However, by referring to 3 paradigms of the gift and by claiming that the ceremonial gift as a specifically public form of gift exchange among established groups no longer constitutes a dominant phenomenon in modern society, one may wonder whether enough's distinction doesn't suggest an equivocation, that is, that we're using the same word for entirely different concepts. Now, enough suggests that the ceremonial gift is above all a procedure of public reciprocal recognition among groups in traditional societies, particularly those without a state structure. Now, if that is true, and if it's true that in modern states, its function as guarantee of public reciprocal recognition among the members of society has by and large been taken up by the law and the whole of the public, political and legal institutions, then one may wonder whether his profound analysis of the ceremonial gift is little more than of historical interest. Does it still concern us? Do we still find instances of it? But also enough, there are passages where one would think, well, actually, maybe he doesn't use the expression, but maybe one could speak of an analogy of the gift. So yes, to say there are 3 types of gift, but they have something in common, something very important in common, so that one is not strictly equivocating by calling all 3 of them gift. Every form of gift giving contains a central characteristic of the ceremonial gift. So we can speak of an analogy of the gift, inasmuch as the primary purpose of exchange rituals is not to give goods, but to recognize one another publicly as parties in an alliance conducted through the goods exchanged. One can say that the ceremonial gift is a specifically human act of public recognition. It is nothing less, as such, then, it is nothing less than an act foundational of humankind, and its model is found across every relationship among human beings. So here, enough is very broad. He says the model is found in every relationship among human beings. He explicitly includes relationships that involve the other 2 forms of the gift discussed above. So also the oblative and the solidaric gift are in some ways forms of recognition, and that is what all gifts have in common. Every encounter or social relationship presupposes the act of reciprocal recognition, and that means to designate every human being, every other, as someone who has a dignity and who deserves to be respected unconditionally. So we can give the name gift to all 3 of these forms. Now, yes, the fact is that the gift, even a ceremonial gift, is not a thing of the past, but it is still present, highly relevant even in societies with a centralized state and institutionalized forms of public recognition, such as laws, parliaments, courts. And we find what an example, a very interesting example that enough gives to show where we find the gift as a pact of recognition he refers to an example given by Levi Strauss. Levi Strauss says, well, he's witnessed how people in France, sitting in a restaurant, not a very expensive restaurant, they had to share the tables and sitting in front of each other with strangers. And everyone had his own flask of wine. And what did they do? They were actually, every customer pours the content of his own flask into the glass of the customer facing him or her or sitting next to them, who then reciprocates the gesture. So they are all giving wine one to the other. So they could just as well have poured the wine into their own glass. In fact, instead, they all got the wine on the house. It's part of the menu. And everyone takes his own bottle and pours it into the glass of the other. What has happened? Almost nothing, enough says, and almost everything. As the permutation of an identical good, the exchange is a zero-sum gain. And yet, through this gesture, enough says, each participant expresses to the other his or her wish to recognize him, to honor his presence. Each has told the other, you exist for me. I demonstrate this to you, I respect you. Here we have a clear instance of what enough calls a ceremonial gift. The gift of wine of one stranger to another is not an oblative gift, because ultimately each party later receives back what he or she has initially offered. Nor is it the case of a solidaric gift, since one's neighbor at table is not in need. The gift here is, strictly speaking, an offer of recognition, which, as enough points out, is always also a request for recognition. And therefore, recognition can only be reciprocal. If the gift is an offer and at the same time a request for recognition, then reciprocity is part and parcel of its logic. The dinner guests point in pouring their wine to their neighbor. Their point is to tell the neighbor, you exist for me. Here then, one can see the ground for the obligation to reciprocate, and even to reciprocate in some ways more, because one says, well, you exist for me, and not only do you exist for me, maybe I want to be your friend. So I give you a bit more so you can give me back also. But so here is the point of it, of the gift, of the obligation to reciprocate, not to do likewise. So someone pours wine into your glass, and you don't do it also to him. Not to do likewise is not a simple omission, but a positive offense. Like someone is greeting you, you don't return the greeting. That is not simply not doing, but it is somewhat of a declaration of war. It is to say, all right, I count for you, but I didn't invite you. You, in any case, do not count for me. Reciprocity, repayment, is obligatory as long as one wants to continue to take part in what enough calls a type of a game. According to him, we can understand the obligation to reply once we realize that we are dealing with the structure of a game, an alternation principle akin to that of any game with more than one player. To enter the game is to accept as principle the obligation to reply. To fail to reply is to give up the game. Now, the game is not just any play. The game here is a very serious one. It is the game of public recognition. A neutral stance is impossible the moment I'm confronted with another human being. Not greeting the stranger with whom I'm taking the elevator. Not saying a word to the unknown neighbor at my dinner table in an overcrowded restaurant. Not to acknowledge the other with whom I'm crossing paths on a lonely road. Even worse, not to reciprocate a gesture of recognition. like a salutation once it has been offered. All this, in the last analysis, amounts to a refusal to enter the game. It is a refusal of recognition, which is ultimately an ever so subtle declaration of war. If war then is the refusal of recognition, then peace is not simply the absence of war, but the constant effort and commitment to recognize the other and of finding ever new ways of doing so. Peace is thus an activity, even more so than war is. The gift as a pact of recognition is at its core. The spirit of the gift, the mysterious how in the discourse of the Maori, is now revealed as the very spirit of reciprocity. Now, the gift is still relevant for us today, also in terms of Marcel Mauss. And how does he, in the interpretation of Marcel Mauss, the reciprocal gift is nothing else than the inaugurating gesture of reciprocal recognition among human beings, a gesture unique among living beings in that it is performed through the mediation of an object from the world, or more precisely, a third-party thing, and not just a thing. It must come from the self and stand for the self as part of his very being and witness to the commitment made. Now, okay, I need to skip a few things. So let me come. To inaugurate a relationship of reciprocal recognition is to enter into an alliance with someone. This pact of recognition is mediated by a third-party thing as the symbol of the alliance. In concluding covenants, the ancient Greeks and Romans had the practice of breaking pottery in half and handing over to each party one of the broken pieces, which was called precisely the symbol. And there is no covenant without a symbol. We need a symbol. The spouses on the wedding day exchange a ring. Enough even speaks of, he says, there's no covenant without an ark of the covenant. And as much as the gift is meant to signify oneself and commit oneself, one's very self is implicated. One can, now let me come to the application of what we said to the theology of the body. I had prepared more, but time was flying. So what is the main result of the hermeneutics of the gift we have proposed this far? We have seen that the notion of the gift is strictly correlated with that of the covenant. The gift is an invitation to mutual recognition, to a covenantal relationship. In Marcel Mauss, and precisely particularly in Marcel Enough's interpretation of Mauss's findings, the gift is a pact of recognition. It is an invitation to form an alliance and therefore requires reciprocity. The very spirit of the gift, the Maori's how, is the spirit of reciprocity. And there is nothing magical or superstitious about the notion of the how. Already, St. Thomas Aquinas said very similar things from a philosophical and Christian point of view. According to him, every effect turns naturally to its cause. The natural order requires that he who has received a favor should, by repaying the favor, turn to his benefactor according to the mode of each. The gift is the symbol of the covenant. By giving, receiving, and returning the gift, by entering into relations of mutual recognition, human beings actualize their very selfhood, They become fully what they already are. In the light of this hermeneutics of the gift, let us now proceed and interpret a number of the central affirmations that John Paul II makes in his catechesis on human love in the divine plan, particularly in catechesis 13 to 22, dedicated to the topic of man in the dimension of the gift. John Paul II begins this section by reflecting on the meaning of creation. The meaning of creation is gift. In fact, creation constitutes the fundamental and original gift. And while it is true that every creature bears within itself the sign of the original and fundamental gift, it is also true that in the account of creation and of the visible world, giving has meaning only in relation to man. In the work of creation, it is only about him that one can say a gift has been granted, the visible world has been created for him. In other words, while without the human person, the creation of the visible world would always mean God's calling things into being out of nothing, it would nonetheless not have the character of a gift. One could object and say, well, the tigers and lions and bears also enjoy the goods of creation, don't they? How come creation cannot be called a gift for them? At least not properly and strictly speaking. Well, John Paul II himself clarifies that the giving of a gift indicates the one who gives and the one who receives the gift, as well as the relation established between them. But could one not say that certainly the animals, and perhaps even all living creatures at least, certainly enjoy being alive and enjoy the world? Are they not in some ways receiving the gift of life and the goods of the earth? If we understand creation as a gift in the ceremonial sense, then we can see it as the very first opening gift that invites to reciprocity and seeks to establish an alliance. In this sense, then, a gift can be granted, strictly speaking, only to one who is able to enter into a covenant, one who can reciprocate. And while cats and horses can receive their being, they cannot recognize the giver as giver. They are unable to respond. Only a self, a someone who can be accountable for himself or herself can do so. With the creation of this someone, something new happens. The world becomes a gift. Creation becomes a covenant. This is why in a passage very dear to Hannah Arendt, St. Augustine can distinguish between the beginning of the world as principium and the beginning of the human being as initium. So Augustine says that a beginning be made, man was created before whom no one was. The pronoun Augustine uses here is the personal one, nullus. There was no one before the creation of the human being. Only with Adam, someone has been created. Someone, not something, but someone. Someone capable of responding, of reciprocating the gift. The very reason why the visible world was not a gift before the creation of Adam is also the reason for why no suitable help was found for him among the animals. John Paul II puts it this way: none of these beings, the animalia, in fact offers man the basic conditions that make it possible to exist in a relation of reciprocal gift. For him, the gift reveals the very essence of the person, realizes him or herself only by existing with someone and by existing for someone. Here again, the gift is related to the covenant. It is about a way of living together signed by mutual trust and recognition. Though the Polish pontiff at times speaks of disinterested gift, he also makes it clear that the gift by its nature requires reciprocity. One may probably interpret the expression disinterested gift in Caro Wojtyła, John Paul II, in different legitimate ways. One option of interpreting it is definitively to be excluded. The disinterested gift cannot mean a unilateral, entirely oblative gift, completely altruistic gift that is not interested in the other's response. For John Paul II, the gift is necessarily reciprocal, and only as reciprocal it establishes the communion of persons. In other words, a communion comes about by means of a communication. What is communicated in the communion of persons is precisely, in some ways, one's entire life. To the point this is possible this side of heaven and apart from the gift of self in its most literal sense, that is, in martyrdom. It is clear that the man awakening from his sleep in Genesis 2:23 receives the woman as a gift from God. He is singing the first jubilant wedding song of humanity. This time she is flesh from my flesh, bone from my bones. In his meditations on the gift, written in 1994, but published only posthumously in 2006, John Paul II asks the question, can one man say to another, God has given you to me? The entire text is a reflection on this one question, which it emphatically answers in the affirmative. John Paul II points out that people live not only alongside one another, but also in manifold relationships. They live for each other. Not only do they give themselves to each other, but God gives them to one another. Commenting on Adam's experience when first beholding Eve, the Polish pontiff surmises, God gave you to me. That would have been the words Adam would have thought. No. Now, if Eve is a gift from God to Adam, then she herself is a symbol of the giver. The giver is present in her. It is by giving her to Adam that God invites Adam to a covenant. If she is the covenant pledge, the symbol of God's covenantal offer, then marriage is indeed a natural sacrament. It is the sign and instrument of God's covenant with mankind. Eve is the only creature created after Adam, and thus, in a special sense, she has been created for him. She is God's entirely special gift to Adam, the supreme gift, as Levi-Strauss puts it when he speaks about the giving of the woman, of the wife, from one family group to another family group, as a covenantal relationship in exogamic marriage. Or she is even the very first ark of the covenant, to use the phrase that Marcel Enough formulated. She is, in any case, the sign of the first covenant. One can thus understand the link that John Paul II sees between the mystery of creation as a gift that springs from love and the beatifying beginning of man's existence as male and female, the whole truth of their bodies and of their sexes, which is the simple and pure truth of communion between persons. The creation of Eve as gift from God to Adam is the confirmation of the covenant of creation. Sexual difference, the human being's creation as male and female, is the sign and symbol of the covenant of creation. Creation is a gift to humanity and thus an invitation to a pact of recognition between the human, rational creatures and their Creator. The creation of Eve, the gift of the woman, is the intensification of this covenantal offer, like an exclamation mark behind the affirmation, creation is a gift for you. God is inviting Adam and Eve together to a covenant with him. And the sexual difference is a corporeal sign of this invitation. So as in Marcel Mauss and Marcel Enough, so in the book of Genesis, this gift, this covenantal offer needs a response. Now, God gave Adam and Eve the possibility to respond. Now, that was the necessity, the importance also of the command of the law, don't eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That was the Creator's way of inviting Adam and Eve to a reciprocity, to let them say yes to his covenantal offer. The covenantal offer needed a response, and the response was, or would have been, their obedience to a command of God that didn't cost them anything, because they had the whole garden. It was a garden full of fruits, a wonderful place, and there was just this one little tiny thing God asked of them: don't eat of that tree. To give them the opportunity to reciprocate, to say, yes, dear God, you are so good. You have given us all of creation. You have given us the lions and the tigers and the bears and the elephants and all the creatures, wonderful creatures, and all the fruits of the tree. It's a wonderful place you put us in here in the Garden of Eden. And we will do this tiny little thing. We will observe this little covenantal stipulation that you put there. We don't understand why, but that is not important. We trust you. And as a matter of trust, we will not eat of that fruit. Here's our reciprocity. Here's our response, our paying back to you your generous gift. Now that is in some ways, in this context, how to interpret the stipulation, do not eat of the tree. Now we know how the story continued. The gift requires reciprocity. That the gift requires reciprocity to be to really form a covenant. Here's the whole drama of salvation history. And of course, we know as Christians, when we believe that the new Adam and the new Eve reciprocated, that in the new Adam, in Jesus, humanity was able to respond positively to God's invitation of a covenant relationship with him, so that the way is open that this covenant has been, in fact, not only offered, but now it has been stipulated, it has been received, and it is in act. We have the possibility of living in a covenantal relationship with God through Jesus. Now, but the whole idea of the gift, we see, is really at the core of salvation history, not only of the theology of the body, in some ways of human history, in as much as it is correlated to the notion of covenant. So that is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you, everyone who followed me. And yes, so let me stop here. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephan Kampowski. There is one question. I will read it. So, giving a gift entails the gift of oneself to a certain degree, because if the gift is not disinterested, then it will become a sort of investment. No? This is, bueno, I think that is more an acceleration of what you have said to us, but I think that in your en las suas exposiciones you have responded this question, but what do you think about what Lorena wrote?
So evidently it is true that, there can be a gift. Marcel Mauss even speaks of the poisonous gift, or he points out how the gift can be poisonous. In German, the word that, Germans have the same word as the English gift, just that in German the word G-I-F-T, the word gift, means poison. So the gift can be poisonous. It can be a way of trying to manipulate people. It can be question of disinterested. It can be insincere. It can be a way of trying to put people into your debt so you can manipulate them, and that is clearly not a gift. You can call that a bribe, maybe, or manipulation. However, it's important the problem with the term disinterested gift is that one could understand it wrongly, like disinterested in a response, maybe. No, the gift is, that's important. The gift is interested in a response, but it's interested in the response because it's interested in the other. It's not interested in receiving something from the other. I'm not buying something from the other, but I'm different levels, evidently, of the gift. I am, if I'm greeting someone on the street, yes, I would hope that he also greets me back. I'm inviting him to a relationship of reciprocity, even on the very fundamental sense of being citizens of the same town, or just being fellow human beings, and say, I recognize you as a human being, so I say hello to you as we're alone on the street on a Sunday morning at 5 a.m. and no one else is there. I may just say hello. Or someone is greeting me, I return the greeting. That is even a gift. A gift is an offer and request for recognition, and therefore it is hoping for reciprocity. Now, this recognition can be simply recognize each other as fellow human beings, or it can be, here we have a very special relationship, and I'm recognizing you not only as fellow citizen or fellow human being, I'm recognizing you as my wife or as my husband for the woman. So can be an invitation to a very special relationship, a very specific covenant. But yes, sometimes there's what you label a gift, and it's really a manipulation. A contract, like buying and selling even, is not a manipulation. You just mustn't call it a gift. You say, no, here we're having a contract, and even I recognize you as someone with whom to make a contract. So I'm buying these shoes, you're selling me these shoes, I'm buying these shoes from you. I'm not just stealing them. I recognize you as someone, and I'm paying you for what you offer me. So it's not a gift, but it has some aspect of mutual recognition.
Yes. Allora, tante grazie, professore, per la sua risposta, per la sua esposizione. Anche voglio ringraziare moltissimo Veritas Amoris Project partecipare attivamente in questo congresso. La risposta è stata buona perché pure lei ha ringraziato la sua risposta, Lorena era il suo nome. Allora la ringrazio ancora, professore, se Dio vuole ci vedremo di nuovo ancora.
Ok, grazie, thank you, grazie tante per l'invito, grazie.
Grazie.